Welcome. My name is Donna Lucas, and on behalf of the Board of Directors for the Public Policy Institute of California, we're happy to see you all here for what is going to be an amazing and an exciting program. We're delighted to welcome University of California President Janet Napolitano. Thank you for being here. This event is part of PPIC's speaker series on California's future support. We would like to thank so many of those who have helped us put this together. The Applied Materials Foundation, Bank of America, Berggruen Institute of Governance, the California Endowment, the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, the Dave and Susan Coulter Family Foundation, the James Irvine Foundation, Pacific Life Foundation, the S.D. Bechtel Jr. Foundation, Sierra Health Foundation, Southern California Edison, the Stewart Foundation, Union Bank, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, and our knowledge partner, McKinsey & Company. Thank you so much for your support. We'd also like to thank the PPIC Donor Circle, which also helps support the speaker series, and thank you again for that. And anyone is welcome to join the Donor Circle or to support any of these programs. But before we get started, 2 housekeeping issues. First of all, could you take some time to turn off your cell phone? I hear one right now. And second of all, would you please, on your way out, please take a moment to fill out the confidential evaluation survey. It's found in your packet of materials at each of the table. That information really helps us in moving forward with other programs, so please take a moment to do that. So now on to the program. To get things started, we're first going to hear from PPIC Bren Fellow, Hans Johnson, about the state of higher education in California today. Hans is a national recognized demographer. He is the author of influential publications on higher education and workforce issues. And I invite you to read more about Hans and the rest of our speakers in the package today. As I say, Hans is always the most entertaining presenter of researchers, so we're delighted to have you. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. So my role here is to provide context for the discussion between the president of PPIC, Mark Baldassare, and the president of the University of California, Janet Napolitano. At PPIC, we've been doing a lot of work looking at California's long-term future. And in doing that work, we've recognized that one of the biggest challenges facing California is something we call the workforce skills gap. And specifically, what I mean by that is our economy is increasingly demanding more highly educated and more highly skilled workers, and yet our higher education policies and our higher education institutions are not on a pace to meet that demand. At PPIC, we have projected that by 2025, we will fall 1 million college graduates short of where we need to be with respect to our economic demand, and that's college graduates with a bachelor's degree. Other people, including California Competes, have estimated that the gap for training that is short of a bachelor's degree but involves some post-secondary education would add about another million to that workforce skills gap. So this is a situation that we want to resolve, and we need to resolve it through smart policies and effective programs. What's been happening fairly recently, though, is that we've been moving in the wrong direction. Our economy is increasingly demanding these workers, and yet, partly because of budget cuts and other kinds of constraints, we have not been able to meet the growing demand. Now, certainly, the budget problems that we faced related to the recession have been a part of that, but I would also say that even from a broader historical perspective, California has been de-emphasizing higher education in terms of its budget priorities. So let me give you a pretty stark statistic that illustrates that point. About 10 years ago, for every general fund dollar that we spent on corrections, we spent $1.89 on UC, CSU, and the community colleges, so almost twice as much. By 2011-12, for every correction dollar that we spent only 82 cents for UC, CSU, and the community colleges. So these decisions that we've made, whether they're intentional through deliberative policies and planning or not, or the response of these budget problems, have serious consequences and have consequences for students. And at PPIC, we've looked at a lot of those consequences. Certainly, we all know that tuition has gone up. We've also looked at student debt in California. And here, the news is partly good. Our public universities do a pretty good job at keeping student debt low. But the not-so-good news is that student debt is increasing, and it's increasing fairly rapidly at our public universities as well as at private institutions in our state. But I think even more alarming, we are serving fewer students than we should be serving. Our high school graduates have stepped up to this demand, with substantial increases in the number of high school graduates meeting the college preparatory requirements for admission to UC and CSU, known as the A through G courses. And increasing shares of our high school graduates are taking and passing advanced placement courses and exams. These are college-level courses that are offered in their high schools. California ranks among the very top states in terms of the share of our high school graduates who are taking and passing those exams. So that's a bit of good news. But the not-so-good news is that large and growing numbers of those students who are applying for admission to the University of California and the California State University systems are not finding rooms for themselves at those campuses. Increasingly, UC is redirecting students away from the campuses that students are applying to and towards the one campus that has not been impacted, UC Merced, and the California State University system. All of its large campuses have declared themselves to be impacted, which means they're not able to accommodate all of the students that are qualified that are applying to their institution. Now, having painted maybe somewhat of a grim picture, I think we're hopefully on a new page here, and for the last couple years at least, we've seen renewed state support through increases in the general fund to our higher education institutions. And I think that sets us on, hopefully, a new path. It's probably a lot better time to take over the presidency of the University of California now than it would have been 4 or 5 years ago. And we heard from Mark Udolph near the end of his term, something to that effect too, I think. So this is hopefully a new and good path that we're on. But certainly there are still challenges that remain. The budget increases have been relatively small compared to the size of the budget cuts. Affordability remains a primary issue. In fact, when we ask Californians in our statewide survey what issue they're most concerned with respect to higher education, it is affordability. And increasingly, policymakers are asking higher education institutions to be accountable through performance-based measures and perhaps even performance-based funding. Finally, I would say the biggest challenge is that we need to provide more higher education opportunities and have more students complete college than we're currently on a pathway to do. The long history of California is one in which educational progress and economic progress have gone hand in hand. And with the right information, from PPIC, of course, and the right policies, we can return to that path and help close the workforce skills gap. Thank you. And now I'd like to invite Mark Baldassare and President Janet Napolitano to the stage.
Hey, thanks. You bet. Nice job. Very good. Hans, thank you for setting up the conversation so nicely. Janet Napolitano, it's a pleasure to have you here today at our first 2014 Speaker Series event. And I think you can tell by the size of this audience and the people who are here today that there's a great deal of interest and enthusiasm in the work that you're doing. I just want to say a few things to just put the conversation in context a little bit more. The University of California system being president is a very big job. There are 10 campuses, 5 medical centers, 3 national laboratories, and an agriculture station. And of course, the UC system today also now has the men's team is in the NCAA Final 16. One team.
Yep.
And the women's team, we'll find out today, but we're represented in the basketball world.
That's right.
So,
Absolutely.
there we have it. For those of you who don't know who Janet Napolitano is, it's like, where have you been, you know? But let me just say a few things. A really distinguished and admirable career in public service is the way I would describe the career of Janet Napolitano. Before becoming the 20th president of the University of California 6 months ago, Secretary of Homeland Security for 4 years, governor of the state of Arizona, and then many other things that really reflect a distinguished career in public service. And we're happy that that you're in California now doing this work for us.
Delighted to be in California.
Thank you. And so I thought we would start our conversation today by really giving you a chance to talk about why Californians should care about public support for the University of California.
I think the University of California has the reputation of being the best public research university in the country, indeed in the world. And what does that mean, and why should people care about that if you don't have a student going to the university or you haven't gone there yourselves? Well, if you look at the fields that we are preeminent in, from medical research, energy, environmental sustainability, agriculture, the arts, the entertainment industry, I could go on and on and on, but when you look at California, the depth and breadth of its economic existence and what fuels that, the intellectual capital, the innovation, the creativity, the workers who fuel that, that's directly related to the University of California. If you have a child who has been ill, they may be being treated at Children's Hospital that we just acquired in Oakland. If you are worried about the drought and you're a grower in the valley, chances are, through our A&R division, we are working with you on all those drought-related issues. If you're concerned about energy and the supply of energy that California needs now and for the future, well, the UC is going to be heavily involved. So our presence, our existence, is much more intertwined with California than only the academic mission, which is our primary mission. California does not thrive if the university doesn't thrive. When I took this job, one of the things I told the president was, look, the United States cannot thrive if California doesn't thrive, and California is not going to thrive if this university doesn't thrive. These things are totally interconnected. So it's an exciting time to be here, and there's a lot of work to be done.
Fantastic. Thank you. This is a state that's very dynamic, 8th largest economy in the world. It's also a state where there is underway big change in the demography and in the economy of the state. Globalization and technology also impacting the state, but the demography and the economy changing. I wonder, from your point of view, having now been in the position of president for the last 6 months, how you think about that change that's underway and what impact it has on the mission of the University of California and all the work that a public research university of world-class stature like UC has to do.
Well, it's interesting. I was listening to the setup for this discussion, and I think there's some additional facts that are helpful to understand, and that is, in addition to all the work we do in all the fields I've just described, this university is a huge engine of social mobility for California to take and absorb the demographic changes that are underway and to really help the next generation move forward. So a few statistics, 42% of our students are low-income students, meaning they qualify for Pell Grants. That's the vernacular that's used in higher ed. 46% of our students are first-generation college students, meaning they didn't have a parent who graduated from college. almost half. A number of our students, over a third, come from families where English is not the primary language spoken in the home. And I could give you some further illustration, but the fact of the matter is that these students are now in a world-class university with all of the potential that is attendant to that. And so you can see how California, as it's changing demographically, and the next generation is changing in terms of its composition, the university is embracing that and building its student body on that.
And it's been about a decade that the voters passed Proposition 209, and we have not had affirmative action programs like we used to in the UCs and the other higher education systems. What is your thought about the future? You know, is that something is that a tool that's needed? Can UC and the other schools do that job of making this social transformation without, what's your opinion on affirmative action programs?
Well, I think, you know, the law is a law, like it or not, and the attempts to repeal it now have been withdrawn for the time being. I think that the law does not encompass all of the things that we can do to make sure we have a diverse student body. For example, I don't think outreach programs and working with school districts in underserved areas or historically underrepresented populations is impacted by 209. And so what I've directed our staff to do is really focus on that outreach. Let's get into and work with not just high school, but middle school. And we're doing it in conjunction with our community college and CSU partners. Because the idea, of course, is that higher education should be an aspiration available to any California student who wants to go for it. The other way you deal with it, quite frankly, is accessibility and affordability. So tuition increases, they've been a problem. It's still economically a very good deal compared to other universities, but it's still, particularly if you're from a family where no one's gone to college or a low-income family, it's a lot of money. Well, okay, how do we deal with that? Well, we have in place programs so that anyone from a family that makes less than $80,000 a year doesn't pay any tuition. Half our students pay no tuition whatsoever. And those who graduate with debt graduate with far less debt than the national average. California did something really right in this regard, and that is return to aid. And what that means is on your tuition dollars, 30% of those go right back in to support tuition payments for lower income students. I don't think any other state has done it that way, and that's the reason why the California schools, particularly the University of California, can remain such an engine of social mobility even during this period of recession.
Interesting. Wow. So you visited all the campuses as part of your startup during the first 6 months of your tenure as UC president. And I'm wondering, in visiting those campuses, what surprised you? Anything that you saw or heard that you thought, wow, I didn't see the world that way beforehand?
Well, the dining halls surprised me. They eat a lot better now than I did when I was in college. And the kind of the accoutrements that go along with that. I think we have such an intelligent student body. These students could go anywhere in the United States to university, and they stay at the University of California. They get a world-class education, and they stay primarily in California. And that is a huge resource for this state. We graduate thousands of students every year, both at the undergraduate and graduate school level. And let me just pause a moment, graduate school, because it's, we're producing the next generation of basic scientists, innovators, engineers, people involved in creativity. When you look at California and its economic development, both now and what we envision for it in the future, that's going to tie directly in part to that very rich graduate student experience that we provide.
Fantastic. It's a lot of work to do to visit 10 campuses in that amount of time.
Yeah, it was good.
But
I had a great time, actually.
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Great. We haven't had a UC president, at least in my lifetime, maybe ever, who came to the position having been a cabinet secretary and having been a governor. And I think your appointment initially surprised everyone, and then everybody thought, oh, well, coming into this with a lot of experience. I'd like to hear from your point of view, what are some of the advantages of having the background that you come from at the cabinet secretary level and at the governor level of now being a UC president?
You mean, why am I perfect for this job?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm sure that you had to answer
Just
this
checking.
question
Yeah,
before,
yeah.
but I think everybody'd be interested in hearing that.
Well, look, you have to understand the organization of the University of California. Each campus is run by a chancellor who has the responsibility for ensuring the academic and research mission of that campus. But the president of the system really operates as a CEO, responsible for setting an overall vision for the organization, working on the budget, being up here in Sacramento, dealing with labor, dealing with all the other issues that go into managing a large, complex public institution. So when you look at the background I bring to the job, that's exactly what I've been doing. From running a state, by the way, the state budget of Arizona when I left was about $9.5 billion total. The budget of the University of California is $25 billion. Just to give you a sense of scale. Now, on the other hand, DHS was $55 billion, so I've been all over. After a while, a billion is a billion, but these are large numbers. The point of fact, however, is these are large, complicated institutions, and the CEO has to be able to deal with all of the myriad issues that are involved on a day-to-day basis, but also the overall forward motion of the institution, where it's going to go, how it's going to grow, how we get ahead of issues before they become problems. And that's really the experiential set that I bring to the job.
Mm-hmm. Both from governor and secretary.
Really from being a U.S. attorney and attorney general, running large prosecution type offices where you really get used to having to make lots of decisions all the time, and then moving on, understanding that things have to happen. And I only want to see a piece of paper once, and then it's off my desk, and it's onto somebody else, because the thing has to keep moving and growing. And that's, the responsibility of the CEO is to make sure that we build a team that appreciates that, embraces the vision, and then we are supporting our chancellors and supporting our campuses, each of which have a different personality, by the way. So these are not cookie cutter campuses by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, definitely. So I read your new initiatives. There's 6 of them, or really if you count the ones that are sub-initiatives, I'd say there are really 10 initiatives that you've laid out as what you want to accomplish. And I don't know that everybody here is familiar with all of them, or maybe you want to talk about some of them that to you, sort of reach the level of being the most important, what you're focused on now. But I'm always interested when somebody comes in to a new position like you have and lays out initiatives. How did you get to that? What are they? Why are they important? And what can the folks here who've come to lunch, take home with them that they could learn about those new initiatives?
First of all, you study, you listen, and you learn. Mm-hmm. You're not coming in as a monarch. You're coming in as a leader. And so you really want to take advantage of the experiences of those who've come before and where we sit in context in California. But some of the initiatives, I think, are very straightforward. You know, we want a tuition policy that is as low and predictable as possible. We want to balance our books, but we need to be able to balance our books by looking at, all right, well, what is it going to take to do that and provide for things like enrollment growth and maintain our physical facilities and hire and keep the best faculty in the world. You know, what is that going to cost? So that's one. One really works on transfer students. 30% of our students come from the community colleges. And that is a lot of our, by the way, our student veterans primarily come from the community colleges. A lot of our underrepresented students from underrepresented groups come to us from the community colleges. How do we make that transfer process as smooth and efficient as possible? So work very closely both with the chancellor of the community college system and the chancellor of CSU. One involves our place in the environment of California. We are a large institution. We have a big footprint wherever we are. So I've set the goal that we will be carbon neutral by 2025. We want to lead by example. And by the way, we're doing some amazing work in this area. Davis, just down the road, has got basically carbon neutral development that students live in now, and so forth. And then the whole business of the application and movement of the basic research we do into the marketplace. Some call that tech transfer. There's a lot of different names you use for it, but I believe that we must have a much closer and seamless process by which the work that we are doing with our faculty, with our students, in our laboratories, finds its way out into the world to help address some of the world's big problems. We have some initiatives underway that deal with some of those problems. Right now, we're in the process of pulling together work on all of our campuses having to do with food. And you say, food, what's about that? Well, think about that. How many billions of people in the world go to bed hungry every night? What is our source of food, sustainability of food, the relationship of food to health, and so on. And California, of course, is the food center of the United States and indeed the world. I think the University of California should be the go-to university for the entire world where any topic related to food is concerned. So we'll do a big formal announcement on this later when it's more fully baked. That's a pun. Work with me. But trying to take what we do and put a larger system-wide vision over it is one of our major goals.
One of the other initiatives that I took note of was the funding for undocumented students, and I thought maybe you might want to you might want to mention that also.
We had some one-time monies that I was called upon to allocate, and I put them into the presidential postdoctoral fellowship programs and our graduate student programs because they're so very important to our existence as a research university. Also, if we want to work to diversify faculty, we've got to diversify the graduate student and postdoc population. That is the source, that's where faculty comes from. So you got to really work on that pipeline. And then undocumented students, of course, have a whole set of issues that differ from those who are documented. They don't qualify for federal aid. Many of them, of course, come from poorer families, and they have a whole host of other associated issues. So we want to make sure that we have student services available for them as a population. And so we set aside some money for that on the various campuses. Mm-hmm.
That's quite a big list of initiatives.
Well, it's a big university. We ought to be doing a lot, and we ought to be thinking big. You know, it's easy when you hear the litany of problems. It could be, you know, easy just to say, oh man, this is really tough. Well, yeah, but it's also what a great institution we have in California, and we got to fight to keep it that way.
Yeah.
And when people don't want to, they're not going to fight for it unless they feel energized by it and excited by it and understand how it affects their lives. And having that interconnection with Sacramento, with communities throughout the state, and on the issues of the day that are global in nature, not just Californian in nature, that's exciting. And that, you know, really looking at the University of California as this huge engine of change, and how that makes a difference. So, yes, we have a lot of initiatives, and yes, we are going to accomplish all of them because that's what we do.
Fantastic. So, not that you need any more initiatives, because you got plenty, but there's one thing that I didn't see on your list that I'd at least like to get your comments on, and that has to do with online learning. I mean, there's so much discussion today about the role of online learning. We've got some work that we're doing at the Institute on that. Where do you see the future of online learning as in higher education?
I think there's a developing consensus that online learning is a tool for the toolbox where higher education is concerned. That it's not a silver bullet the way it was originally portrayed to be. It's a lot harder than it looks, and by the way, it doesn't, if you do it right, it doesn't really save all that much money, because you still have to have an opportunity for students to interact with either a teaching assistant or an assistant professor or professor at some level. And preparing the courses, if they're really going to be top quality, that's an investment as well. Nonetheless, in terms of helping increase or letting us sustain capacity in terms of being able to use the power of the university, the so-called power of 10, so that students at one campus can online take for credit a class that has been developed at another campus. I mean, there are all kinds of ways to do this. I think early on the notion was you could use online learning for students who needed help when they were getting started, you know, for remedial English or math to be up to speed. I think that's false. I think those students need the teacher in the classroom working with them. I think where online learning, it will turn out to be the most useful is to complement the upper division coursework that we have. And so overall, as a system, working with the academic senate and the academic operations of the university, I think that's where we'll see our focus.
Terrific. So let me get back to your initiatives for a moment. I want to hear from you what your thinking is about tuition, right? So we want some more certainty around tuition. I think that's, are we going to see tuitions remain the same? Because, you know, I heard some things coming out of the Regents meeting recently which suggested that maybe tuitions might be going up to deal with some of the other financial issues. So what's your strategy on tuitions for UC?
Well, I think, first of all, it's not going up in 14-15. So if anybody got that from the Regents meeting,
No,
take
I didn't
it
get
off
that
the
from
table.
that, no.
It's not going up. This is for the media. It's not going up in 14-15. I got a lot of questions about that.
Yeah,
so
I'm
let me
sure.
be perfectly clear. Now, we've got to have a long-term budget plan. And so, you know, when you're doing a big budget, you want to look 3 years out, you want to look 5 years out, you want to look at the major drivers of your cost side of the budget. And we can squeeze, you know, stuff on the administrative and staffing side, although a lot of that has already been done, more than the university gets credit for. By the way, we will not squeeze to excellence. I mean, you can't do it that way. But you can be as efficient as possible, and I'm still intent on finding efficiencies. But you got to look at what are your other major cost drivers. One of them is common to other state agencies, pension. retiree health. And okay, that's a deal. That's, you know, there's no question about that. So, and that's probably our single biggest cost driver right now. Another cost driver is the capital side. You know, we have to continue to grow, build buildings, repair old buildings, make buildings seismically sound. So that's a big cost driver. So we look at our big cost drivers. We look at what we're going to need to operate the university every year. And then we say, all right, well, if the legislature or the federal government doesn't help with some of these things, where is the money going to come from? Well, are we going to close a campus? No. Well, me to get that too. We're not going to close campus. You know, what are some of the other options available to us? One is to increase our connection with the private sector and with philanthropy. And here, let me just pause a moment and say, across the country, there used to be an implied compact between the federal government, and state governments, that the federal government would provide land for universities and research support for what goes on at public research universities. And the states would basically supply the buildings and the operational costs. And if there was a little left over, you might charge a little bit of tuition. Well, that compact has been broken for a long time. People just didn't want to acknowledge it. It's broken. It doesn't work that way anymore. So we have to look at federal funding for what it is. We're still the largest recipient of NIH dollars in the country. And we are still one of the largest recipients of NSF and the other research funds in the country. But the pool that we are the largest in isn't growing. In terms of the state has reduced its contribution, its part of this partnership, drastically during the recession. And you got a picture of that during the opening remarks, partially because of the recession, partially because all of a sudden the state had all these other demands on its budget it had to meet. You know, it had to pay for prisons. It has to pay for K-12. It has other pension requirements that it has to support. And so when you get down to the next largest discretionary item in the budget, it's higher education. So slash, slash. And that left only tuition. Somewhere in there, philanthropy in the private sector, who I think needs to be a fourth leg of this to solve this problem set. And one of the things I'm working on is, all right, what would that kind of partnership look like? Mm-hmm. A public university, not privatized, but recognizing that it has a huge impact on the private sector. Well, there needs to be a vital partnership that reflects that. And then with respect to tuition, keep it as low and predictable as possible, because I think one of the problems was not only did tuition go up at the university, but it went up very suddenly and it went up a lot. And one year in there, it went up twice during 1 year. Mm-hmm. That is not a pleasant surprise for any parent who's paying for their child's tuition. So what we will do is we're developing different budget models going out long-term, and then say, okay, here are the cost drivers. If we got this from the state, this is what we would be able to do on tuition. If we don't, but we got something from the private sector, well, then we can make that adjustment. If somehow the federal government achieves sanity and begins to support higher education and basic research, okay, I know we can always hope. But it might at some point, then that makes a difference. So all of these things need to be taken into account. A long answer, but I'll boil it down to one sentence. We want to keep tuition as low and predictable as possible, and it is frozen through the 14-15 school year.
And if you look out the next, let's say, 4 to 5 years, you think about the college, the UC eligible students that will be coming into UC. Mm-hmm. How do you feel we're set up as a system to enable those students to graduate in a timely manner and have a college experience that's affordable for them?
You know, I think we're actually doing very well. The vast majority of our students graduate in 4 years.
Because when I hear you talking about the changing demographics and what some of the households are that UC students are coming from, it sounds like a good number of them are going to need some financial help as well. And
Right.
are we in a position where the state can provide that so that our students can get through in a good amount of time in an affordable manner?
Right, and that, yes, as I said, 80 grand and below, you pay no tuition. Speaker Perez's middle class scholarship program is now coming into effect, which provides tuition assistance for families up to $150,000 a year. That goes into play. I mean, this all gets taken into account. In terms of class availability, so you can get your degree, I think the average for the entire system is about 4.5 years, but probably 65–70% of our students graduate in 4 years. There's no public university in the country, no public research university in the country that comes close to that. So when these students get in, we can get them and give them a quality education in a reasonable amount of time.
Is the state providing adequate resources for UC to meet its mission? Do you want me to ask the next question?
No. Let me be frank. I mean, I'm looking around this room. There are a lot of leaders in California in this room. The state has to reinvest in higher education. And I don't limit this just to the UC. I'm thinking the state university system and the community colleges as well. And as I said when I started out, you know, this state will not thrive without a very, very thriving higher education opportunity for its young people. And that requires really re-examining what is the partnership that the state is willing to have with the next generation. I think the state can do more. I think the state should do more.
Can you, maybe you can answer this, maybe not, but I'm not asking for a specific number, but what is the range of the shortfall that, as you see it now?
You are asking for a number.
Well, a range. It could be two numbers. It could be in between two numbers instead of one number. But when you say that, yeah, just give me a sense of if the state's not investing enough, what would more look like that would allow the UC to meet the mission?
You know, I'd like to be facile and say between this and this, but that would not be the way to do it.
Okay.
Because there are too many variables there.
All right.
You know, the state has some options available to it. The governor's put a start. He put, 5% budget increase this year. He knows, we all know that does not cover the mandatory increase costs that we have. But it's a start.
Yeah.
We appreciate it as such. And the Assembly has come out with a 9% increase. So, we're dealing in that kind of territory right now. I believe that we ought to be providing for our state policymakers is really a kind of it's a menu. If you do this, then this happens. Mm-hmm. If you don't do this, then this is going to happen. Or if you do half of this and half of this, then this could happen. If the private sector steps up, or we are able to generate more by way of philanthropy, maybe we can do this. So those are the kinds of choices. We know that we have to balance our books, and we take it as a charge to be excellent and to educate this next generation. So keeping all those things together, we've got some challenges.
So at PPIC, we and others in the state, we're focused on the future and the fact that on the current path, we're likely to fall well short of the number of college graduates and college-educated workers that the state would need to keep up with the economy. And that it's going to take the three systems working together and working very effectively together to bridge that shortfall. You've talked about the work that's going on together with Cal State and community colleges. I'd like to get a sense from you about whether that relationship is going to be able to break new ground with the new leadership, with your leadership, Tim's leadership, Bryce's leadership now, than we've seen before.
Well, each of the systems has a new leader right now.
Yes.
And we actually are working very closely with each other and have teams working on different issues. And in fact...
Can you give us some examples of what those issues are?
Well, for example, how can we leverage scale for value so that we unite for some of our procurement and business, our back office operations and centralize them or do them in such a way that we really take advantage of scale? How do we look at our the transfer process itself and what it entails for each student? How do we create, for example, a student-based web portal for each student who begins at a community college who may want to get a baccalaureate degree so that we are tracking them through their community college days so they know exactly what they need to take and what it will count for in terms of a degree at the state university or alternatively at the University of California, those types of things. I'll be with Chancellor Harris, he's from the community college system. We'll be in Long Beach this week at Tim White's board, the CSU board. We each have been at each other's boards, all three of us together. We've testified together here in Sacramento because we think we do owe it to try to maximize our partnership in this day and age. And like I said, I think there's some very practical things we can do. Now, will that fill that worker gap, that big number? No. It can help, but it will not by itself fill that number.
Is there anything we can do to fill that number?
Well, we can, the University of California, we have the capacity to add another 3,500 students at Merced at our campus there. We will do that by the year 2020. We can add some more capacity at our other campuses as well. And by the way, online helps with this because the more we can get kids through in 4 years as opposed to 4.5, that opens up a seat for somebody else coming in. So that actually assists in capacity. We'll be doing some things like that. Cal State, likewise, looking for ways that we can facilitate accepting students and getting them through more quickly should they be able to do so.
What do you hope to accomplish by the end of your first year? You're at the 6-month mark. We talked about it earlier. What do you hope by September you might be able to look back and say, I did something that is going to have a significant impact?
I think on the initiatives, I want to see significant progress on each of them, either that they be finished or that they be well on their way. I want to have achieved a better budget and a balanced budget for the university that takes into account some of the real needs we have to educate this next generation. I want to make sure that as we embark on replacing 2 of our chancellors, UCSF and Irvine, and some other positions in the leadership ranks of our campuses, that we are getting the very best because this university, these campuses run on their chancellors. They are key leaders in higher ed in California. And I want to reopen that conversation with California about why it matters that the University of California be the best public research university in the world, why it matters to them, why should they care, and why we have to fight to keep it what it is.
Thank you. Let's take a few questions. Anybody have a question? How about right here? Yes? Of course, I happened to pick somebody who was furthest away as possible from the microphone, so, yeah.
The Affordable Care Act brings two demands: the increased number of medical professionals and making the delivery of medical services more efficient and effective. What is the university doing to meet those demands?
Yeah, well, you know, the University of California, in addition to everything else it does, is the 9th largest health system in the country. By the time you add up all our hospitals, et cetera, we educate half of the healthcare professionals in the state of California. We supply doctors, dentists, pharmacists. We supply the nursing faculty who are teaching the nursing courses at the state university system. And so we are working under the, and of course we operate a number of hospitals. So we're working through the ACA in terms of affordability. You know, the ACA basically dictates what we can and will be able to charge. That's tough on one side because it's going to push revenues down, but on the other side, what we will see happen is more people will be insured and they will be able to come into the health system. And what we want to focus on, of course, is preventative medicine and treatment of chronic illness and disease. And I think the ACA gives us the opportunity to do that even more than we do right now.
Excellent. Other questions? Over here. Finally, one closer to the microphone.
I just wanted to ask about the notion that California really lacks a public agenda or a set of statewide goals that are meant to address all the needs for higher education across California, public, private, and whatever. Do you have a sense that that's something California needs? Would you feel yourself wanting to be involved in developing a statewide public agenda for higher education into which the UC fits?
Well, in a way, your question suggests, should we revisit the master plan, which is what we had, you know, is 50 years old now. I think the genius of the master plan, of course, was the creation of multiple portals of entry to higher education with a broad-based community college system, state university system, and then the research university, the University of California. I'm not prepared now to take on the master plan. I think I've laid out a pretty full agenda for my first year. However, I have constantly on my mind, what does a 21st century higher education system look like? A public higher education system. And why do I say public? Because we have some very good private universities in California. You've got the one down the peninsula. Et cetera. But they, in terms of scale, in terms of numbers, they're just not big enough. And in terms of being the big engine of social mobility that I described, they're just not that big. But they're part of the higher ed ecosystem that we have. And I think we need to think about, okay, well, what role can and should they play? In the meantime, however, within the ethos of the master plan, what I'm focused on now is making sure that at least for the three big public legs, that we're as coordinated as we can be.
But let me just follow up on your answer. It sounds like you feel like the master plans offers some good guidance, but that for a 21st century education, higher education system, we have to think outside of that box. Or am I overstating?
No, I think we always need to challenge ourselves and think outside the box. And I don't mean that to be critical, but just descriptive. And I believe the master plan remains our fundamental tenet, but is it enough in and of itself to supply the kind of and number of highly educated people that California is going to require?
One question over here, and I think that's, yes?
Yes, good afternoon. You briefly touched on Prop 209, but as an African American female, the disparities in education for African American children, and basically looking at the subgroup as a target and where they are scoring in California, how will you plan on working with the K-12s to ensure that we have a semblance of accountability? Because right now, failure is an option in the public school system.
Yeah, what I'm really looking at right now is, and what I am troubled by, quite frankly, is the fact that the percentage of African American students in our student body hasn't changed in years. And I think we need to redouble our efforts there. Clearly, whatever it is we are doing to prepare young people to come into the University of California and to graduate is not enough. So I've asked our campuses to work very closely with school districts, going down to the middle school area, because what I worry about is young people, even as early as 9th grade, making decisions that foreclose being able to go to the University of California. The second thing I asked our team to do is, look, what I have seen going to different places around the state is that too many people, particularly among historically underrepresented populations, think that they cannot go to the University of California because they cannot afford to go. Because they don't know that if their family makes less than $80,000, they don't pay any tuition. They don't know about the other grants that are available. And they don't see enough students who are their peers who are at those institutions to suggest anything else. So we have got to get the message out that these are public universities, and we want the numbers. We want to move the needle on the numbers and then make sure these students have a great college experience and that they graduate. And so that's where my focus is right now.
And I think embedded in your question and in the answer is that that work between the K through 12 system and the higher education system is going to be necessary to get that word out and create that pipeline going into the future. And that will be, I think, one of the things over the long term that UC and Cal State and community colleges will be working on together. So this has been a terrific conversation. It's been way too short from my point of view. You've been, I think, very forthcoming in your answers. Really appreciate that. Recognizing that this is your first 6 months, I wish you all the best with the next 6 months and beyond. And the audience today, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you all.
And
Thank you.
I want to also, I'd like to thank, as well as our UC president, want to thank Donna and Hans for being part of the program today. Before you leave, please fill out one of the questionnaires so that we get some feedback on this presentation and our program. And thank you so much
All right.
for being part of this.
Thank you all.